And so I really appreciate that everyone's back out here, eager to have a discussion about points of agreement, and perhaps also especially about points of disagreement. And so I think this panel got slightly shortened as well, so we're gonna not have as much time as we wanted, and maybe because of that I'll sort of go past the sort of 80,000 foot question, although people should feel free to set the scene for what you see broadly speaking in the energy world and what this new administration's agenda of energy dominance means, good or bad. But I might start with you, Gretchen, because in addition to that, as a result of various changes in the world, just to come directly to it, we have seen Shell shift strategy 2 years ago when Wael Sawan became the CEO to cut cost, to pull back from renewables, to, I think it's fair to say, refocus on oil and gas and reduce debt. And then 2 weeks ago, the company announced a refresh on that strategy, which also involved a focus on LNG and returning profits to shareholders. And so the question is, for people deeply concerned about the challenge of climate change, I think that was seen as kind of a walk back from commitments that Shell had made. Is it wrong for people to feel that way?
I would say that it is wrong to feel that way. We're still deeply committed to low and no carbon fuels and energy. We have today about $20 billion of capital employed in low and no carbon energy. And we've set some new targets for ourselves that by 2030, we'll have 10% of our capital employed will be in low and no carbon businesses. Today, those businesses make about 3% return. Our goal is that by the end of the decade, they'll make 10% return. And so, going back to the question you asked initially earlier, we very much believe that this is an important point for energy for the world. And it takes really good policy, it takes customer demand, it takes great collaboration, and we're gonna continue to be providing all forms of energy, oil and gas, yes, but also low and no carbon solutions, and that investment is only going to increase between now and the end of the decade. Profitability is important, and so probably we will talk about policy at some point, but having good policy that enables profitability is also important, and those are the types of things that we're focused in on now.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. I think part of that, but tell me if I have it wrong, was sort of maybe a slightly weaker 2030 target, removing a 2035 target, but sticking with a 2050 target. And is it wrong for people to question that as like, well, I promised in my New Year's resolution to lose weight, but I'm going to wait until Thanksgiving to get started, but like Christmas is still my goal. Like, how should people think about that trajectory?
Yeah, so I think what you saw in our recent Capital Markets Day was some of these new investment targets that we've got. So we want to raise from 3% to 10% our low carbon investments. But we have not backed away from some of the emission reduction targets that we've set years ago. And those include having our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2030. We're nearly there, actually, even though we've got 5 more years. But it also includes, uniquely, I think, to our company, a scope 3 target, so reducing the emissions of the products that we sell. So that is all about customer demand, but it's also about how we engage with our customers, how we engage with policymakers. And that is a 15 to 20% reduction in the emissions of the products we sell between 2021 and 2030.
I'll come back to that in a minute. Fred, maybe I'll come to you next, where I started with sort of this new administration's energy policy, energy dominance, and a slew of things from pulling out of Paris to regulatory rollbacks. How do you view, in a moment where energy security and energy affordability, not just in the US, but as I said, in Canada, in Europe, around the world, are more front and center and more of a concern for policymakers? How do you think about this moment of kind of reset we're in, how to balance those goals, what this administration's policy is going to mean, and maybe what's most consequential for the pace of the energy transition among all the changes that we see happening right now in US policy?
Well, thanks, Jason. We are in a new moment, and aside from the politics, we know we have increased energy needs for AI. We know the geopolitics is different, and I completely understand the need for the emphasis on energy access, energy affordability, and energy security. Those are legitimate concerns. But I think what isn't as widely understood as it needs to be is that you can't have any of those three without having climate stability. And so we have to solve for all four things at once. And the idea that we can shut our eyes and pretend climate change isn't happening is downright reckless. And so it's just unacceptable. The good news is that while, the politics have changed in Washington, the science is compelling and the politics around the world remain largely the same. And there are things we can do at the state level, working directly with companies. There are things we can do internationally that can continue to drive us towards solutions. And so what the administration has done is unconscionable and is reckless. The rollback of all the policies on power plants, cars, trucks, methane, mercury and air toxics, much of this is illegal, and we are fighting it in court.
Just on that list, and it's a long list, like what sort of matters more and maybe gets a lot of attention but doesn't matter as much? What are you most concerned about with the shifts you see happening at the federal level now?
Well, as you know, Jason, there's a couple of pollutants that are overwhelmingly dominant for climate change. One is carbon dioxide. We have to electrify everything. We have to, everything that we can. We have to drive down carbon dioxide emissions. But in the near future, methane is critically important. And so I would say that the methane rule that the administration has gone after, the methane fee that has been repealed in Congress, but not the methane rule. Both of those things are of concern, but the methane rule is critical because methane, as you know, is 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide over the first 20 times after release. And when we think, well, maybe methane is a side issue, we absolutely do have to continue to drive down CO2 for sure. It lasts 100 years. But with methane, the burning of fossil fuel planet-wide puts out as much CO2 and drives as much climate change over the next 10 years as the anthropogenic emissions of methane do. It's roughly equal. And so we have an opportunity, as we drive down CO2, as we must, by driving down methane, we can get a much bigger reduction dollar for dollar in temperatures that we would otherwise see in the next 10 years. So if you ask me to pick one that matters to temperatures in the short run, I would say the methane rule, but they all matter.
Pierce, maybe I'll come to you next because you transport a lot of the energy we're talking about, and we are seeing growing demand for gas for a variety of reasons, including hyperscalers and data centers, and we're seeing rising electricity demand in this country, which we haven't seen in a long time. Given the changes at the federal level in policy, what does that mean for what you think is going to happen to the outlook for U.S. energy production, the need for the kind of infrastructure that you build and operate? And does it mean people can take a different approach and will take a different approach toward concerns like the one Fred was just talking about, like methane in the gas system?
So first of all, thanks for being here. Jason, I want to answer that question, but I also want to kind of go back to some things that Fred said. First of all, I think you got to step back and say what's really going to drive this, and I think it's going to be demand. We heard from the first speaker this morning how important it is to win the AI race globally. And so whatever numbers you believe in, the projection of using natural gas for AI generation is anywhere from 3 to maybe 8 BCF a day. So to put that in context, we move around 110 to maybe 115 BCF a day every day here in the United States on average. So it's a decently small percentage. But the other thing that's going to drive this is the LNG exports, which actually goes toward, combating basically energy poverty around the world. And right now we're at about 14 BCF. There's about 10 BCF that's supposed to be added in the next 5 years, and that's actually stuff that's already under construction. So it's not permitting that's going to do that. It's going to go ahead and happen. So that 10 BCF added to, let's just call it 5. You're talking about over the next 5 years an average of about 3% growth. If you look back to 2007 and you fast forward over the next 17 years to 2024, it was actually like 17% or so average for that, and that was about 6% annually. So, I think I think the industry, the midstream industry, basically navigates whatever environment that we're thrown. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse for actually building things. But whatever it is, I think actually the midstream industry can actually perform and meet those needs and meet our AI demand. And then the other thing I want to talk about just a little bit is when Fred says methane, the one thing that we preach at our company is keep it in the pipe. And most of the gas that's used in cities and in homes is methane. But as long as you keep it in the pipe, you're in pretty good shape. Now, it does get consumed in the homes. It's burning furnaces, those kind of things. It does make CO2. But the economics of that for the home, I'll just give you some numbers in Oklahoma, is the average cost per kilowatt hour is somewhere around 12 to 12 so cents a kilowatt hour in Oklahoma. And that same price, if you convert the natural gas consumed, all in delivered, and the price of the natural gas is just over 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So economically, your furnace in your home, especially in colder areas, burns the most amount of energy. And you just can't overlook the fact that you're going to have some form of energy that's a lower price per kilowatt hour.
And does that, just quick follow-up, does that require regulation? And what does it mean if regulations are weakened to keep it in the pipe and avoid methane leaks?
I think the companies that do business in America today, they don't necessarily have to have regulations to do what I say, which is keep it in the pipe. We're all about, making our equipment more efficient. Back when I started in the industry 40-something years ago, everything was what was called pneumatics. And so all of these devices that we use to run the pipelines, they actually emitted methane as just part of the operation. Today, all of those things are electronic. So that's one of the things that's been done to eliminate the methane emissions.
And just a quick response, Fred, what do you think the data shows about how the industry overall, not any one company, is doing at bringing those methane emissions down?
Well, thanks for that, Jason. I was about to flag you. I think some companies have converted from these pneumatics to electronics, but there's a lot of companies in the United States that have yet to do that. And Pierce's company may do a great job, but we need a level playing field. So we absolutely need regulations in order to reduce methane emissions. We are finding with methane our satellite, they're double and triple what the industry has reported. So it remains a serious problem as of today as we sit here. The last thing I would say is it's not just a climate problem. The LNG market in Europe, in South Korea, and Japan, through either regulations or voluntary agreements, are looking to buy clean gas. And unless the United States industry continues the good work some companies, like the two on stage, have done on methane, unless we get the whole industry to do it, which will require regulations, we are disadvantaging that product in the export market.
Jane, do we get it quickly?
Well, I just would completely agree with what Fred just said. I think methane emissions are do need to be regulated in this country. We as an industry have an obligation to support that, I believe. And I think it's both from an environmental perspective, but also from the perspective of our products need to be able to be consumed worldwide, and that will help, yeah.
If we have time, I'll come back to that. But I want to make sure, Jane, we bring you in and kind of, again, stepping back in this, you've worked in philanthropy, in government, in academia, and maybe you could tell people a little bit about what you're doing now. You have a large pot of philanthropy to work with at a moment when I think the environmental movement and the climate philanthropy movement is rethinking approaches. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this moment we're in and where you see things going and what you think needs to be done to make more progress than we're making in achieving some of the objectives that we're talking about.
Yeah, maybe just to say, thank you, Jason. I've devoted my entire professional career to climate change in lots of different capacities. There is no question, the science is very clear, that to limit the worst impacts of climate change, we not only have to get emissions to zero as rapidly as possible, but also we need to go actually negative in all likelihood to limit the worst effects of climate change. That is a huge challenge, and I think the crux of the issue actually is not what does the science say, it is what does as rapidly as possible mean? And that's not a question. We don't live in a climate model, as much as I might wish that we did. We live in a real world full of political and economic constraints and incentive structures and pluralistic societies with lots of competing priorities. And as much as we may wish that everybody was motivated singularly by climate change, they are not. And I think that's a really important recognition that, in fact, most of the environmental and climate movement has come to grapple with. And I think you see this reflected in, maybe I'll just mention in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, I think reflect some of the effort to sort of embed climate in a much broader set of economic and national security strategies. To deploy clean energy as rapidly as possible in a way that attends to the real political and economic constraints and opportunities of the energy transition. And maybe just briefly to say, we've been talking a lot about the regulatory interventions of the Trump administration, which is important and in many ways quite horrifying. And I think one of the things that this underscores for me, and I think for many in the environmental movement, is the importance of a legislative strategy that has durability across the swings of administrations and across what are going to be unavoidable political swings in this country. And we'll see what happens with the IRA, but we have seen Republicans step out and say, this is critically important. If you repeal these tax credits, electricity prices could go up by 10%. Nobody wants that. So I think this is we're at an interesting moment in the climate movement in the United States to sort of test some of the hypotheses and propositions that drove the last 4 years or so of climate advocacy.
And what I hear you saying, I think, is that focus on energy security, national security, diversification of supply chains, like all the stuff we just spoke about in the last panel, you see that as a potential driver and complement to kind of a strategy for climate activism.
Yeah, I mean, I think, your first question about energy dominance, from my perspective, there's nothing fundamentally incompatible with, the narrative structure of energy dominance and a rapid clean energy transition. The problem is, what does energy dominance mean? And in the current administration, it appears to mean restricting domestic oil and gas supply, which is weird, and also making electricity as expensive as possible, which are, to me, that is not a compelling version of dominance. And I think if you think about dominance in a more robust way, it is in fact quite compatible with a rapid clean energy transition. Not one that will happen at the pace and scale that the most vociferous climate advocates would like to see, but one that will happen quickly and with sustainability.
Maybe I'll ask, I'm not trying to stoke disagreement, but I am trying to unearth it and find where there may be some. And so I was talking before, Gretchen was talking about what Shell is doing. I asked about the strategy reset. I think it's worth pointing out, acknowledging that at least until the last 7 to 10 days, we can come back to that in a few minutes at the end, following that strategy reset, Shell's share price rose 25%. Yeah. And my question, maybe Jane and Fred for you, and then come to Gretchen, is sort of, what does that say about the expectation should be placed on energy companies to be leaders in the energy transition if markets are penalizing, not rewarding people for moving faster in that direction?
We need policy in this country and we need policy around the world that recognizes that carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, all the greenhouse gases are costly to throw into everybody's air. The amount of damage, economic damage, human damage, damage to prosperity, damage to the economies of the world that these greenhouse gases are going to wreak on everybody needs to be reflected by policy. That's the whole definition in Economics 101 of an external cost. It's truly not external, but only governments can create that policy. So there's no denying that policy interventions are critically important to solve this problem.
If I could just jump in, and this is the carbon pricing fight, I guess. No, I think I totally agree with Fred. Like these companies are operating within an incentive structure that is shaped by policies. Markets themselves are quite shaped by policy. And I think that that's really critical to acknowledge. Now, I think a fair critique of that the environmental movement might have a wide range of corporate actors, frankly, is that there hasn't been as much effort as we would like to see to engage proactively in the policy conversation to address these concerns, right? Like, to the extent that companies are, and I understand why, because the incentives, it's a hard problem. I understand what the incentives are today, but I think having companies sort of step up and defend the Inflation Reduction Act and advocate for more robust policies to make clean energy cheap and affordable and hasten the transition would go a long way to building trust in the community, I think.
Pierce, you had something, and then Gretchen, if you want.
Kind of add to what's been said here is in terms of walking back, you asked that about, to Gretchen. But I think part of the walking back has occurred because is the pragmatism. How do you do this? I mean, we can all come up with the variables of what it is that's causing this, whether or not it's affordability, reliability, climate change. But unless you look at all of those things and consider them as a constellation of a North Star, not just a North Star of climate, you've got to consider all of those things. And it may look like a walking back, but it's physics and economics that's driving this.
Can I just add, maybe?
Yeah, please. I mean, I was going to say, to Pierce's point, when I read the refresh, the strategy, some version of, I'm not quoting it exactly, was like, the transition's going slower than we expected, was part of the explanation. And I think some people might read that and say, yeah, that's because you're not moving fast enough. So if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think when you asked if we were walking back, we definitely have picked some winners and losers. We have, over the last decade, recognized where we have competitive advantages and where we don't. And we have exited some of the industries that we've entered, recognizing that that's not probably where we should be playing. That said, we are still very much investing we're building the world's largest green electrolyzer in Europe right now, for example, that's powered by a offshore wind farm that we're building. That's going to actually power with green electricity the chemical plant and refinery that we have there. So it is absolutely still something that we're investing in, but we're picking some places where we're really, really good at what we're doing, and we're exiting some places, for example, retail power. That is not a place where we have been successful, because the decarbonization needs to be profitable, and that's where good policy comes in. We need to be able to show that we can take the $20 billion of capital employed that are making 3% return and improve that to 10% by the end of the decade. We need to be able to show that. If we're able to show that, we'll be investing even more. And so I think that's what you're seeing now, is that we're able to quantify what we're making on those investments and what we want to make on those investments.
I regret this had to get shortened a little bit, but I do want to just close by sort of also talking for a moment about the news literally of the day and the idea that, energy dominance sounds like it might be great for the oil and gas industry, but the latest survey from the Dallas Federal Reserve showed executives concerned about policy uncertainty and chaos, and that was before OPEC announced it was bringing barrels back to the market faster, and of course, Trump's tariffs hit oil prices. So can you just talk for a moment, maybe Pierce and then Gretchen, about what you see in the outlook right now, given where energy prices are and this period of uncertainty? How are people investing in that?
Yeah, I've not made a big career out of projecting where energy prices are going to go. But what I will tell you is the way you go about looking at the current environment we have. It's about asking the right questions, navigating the environment that we're dealt, and developing solutions. And I'll give you just one example to make Fred and Jane feel better about the oil and gas industry. Let's say you wanted an AI data center up in North Dakota, needs lots of electricity. You put in a natural gas-fired electric generation facility. You take the CO2 off of that facility. You use it to enhance oil recovery. And so now you have a different set of economics that you could work with as opposed to just capturing it, transporting it, and putting it in the ground. So I think there are solutions. The question is going to be whether or not, there's going to be some one-offs like that are going to be very, I think, advantageous. But the question is scale. Can you do it at scale?
It would also be great for the administration to, in that instance, support carbon capture and storage, which is not apparent to me in this moment. So that does strike me as a problem.
Gretchen, you have a quick final comment on this moment
I
of
would
uncertainty?
say the current environment in this country in particular there's almost two chapters to it. One, the sort of optimistic chapter is that energy has been placed at the forefront of importance. It's on the agenda, and we are being asked for input, and we are advocating for the things that matter. Whether that's permit reform for everything. We can't even get a permit to build our solar farms right now. And so permit reform, access to energy, all of that is really important, and it's on the agenda. In fact, we're even being asked, what parts of the IRA are really important to you? Well, a lot of it is really important to us, and so we're getting very, very detailed about what we want to see. 45Q, for example, which is carbon capture. We want to see that protected. But then you have the very immediate environment, which is very volatile and very uncertain, and it's hard for us to be thinking about how to make a big capital commitment for something that is going to take maybe billions of dollars in many, many years to start making a return in an environment where we don't know what the economics really are because of the tariff situation. So there's almost two chapters to it at the moment, and I see some positives, and then there's some stuff that really is preventing immediate action, if you will.
Jason, just really quickly, the cause of getting energy prices down, as well as proceeding with the energy transition, is going to be served by the sort of stability that keeping a lot of the IRA in place requires. And it is very encouraging, as Jane pointed out, that there are a series of Republicans who are having input now who understand that their constituents are better served and lower electricity prices are better served by not ripping these provisions out. And so of all the things we've talked about, that is on the front burner and is likely to be decided in the next few weeks or months.
I apologize to all of you that we don't have more time. I was excited and also deeply appreciative that two such thoughtful leaders from the energy industry and from the climate movement were willing to come together on stage here. I'm even more grateful that they returned to stage for robust and respectful dialogue, discussion, and disagreement. And so please join me in thanking our panelists.